Hi, this is Dr. Kurt Woeller for Integrative Medicine Academy. The title of this video is Candida and the Link to Autoimmune Reactivity. So when we look at the immune system overall, we have what's called the myeloid progenitor cells. These are the part of the innate immune system. And then the lymphoid cells, and these are part of the adaptive, sometimes called the acquired immune system. And there's a lot of things going on here, and we've got the neutrophils and eosinophils, basophils, for example, monocytes, which become macrophages. And then over here on the adaptive side, primarily B cells and T cells. Sometimes the natural killer cells are actually linked to the innate immune system. In this particular slide, they're grouping them under the lymphoid progenitor cells. But I want to focus on a couple things, particularly with regards to neutrophils and then macrophages. So what ends up happening with regards to clearing of infection or clearing of damaged cells in various tissues, things called polymorphonuclear leukocytes, this would be basophils, eosinophils, neutrophils, mast cells, for example, get called into an area to clear a pathogen, for example, and there's chemical signals that make that happen. Now, what's interesting is that when, let's say, a neutrophil attacks or engulfs a pathogen, it becomes what's called an apoptotic neutrophil. And what it does is it sends out chemical signals from monocytes that are also circulating in the vasculature to enter the tissue space. Those monocytes differentiate into macrophages. Now, we also have resident macrophages in various tissues as well. But the macrophage comes along and phagocytizes the apoptotic polymorphonuclear leukocyte, or neutrophil in this case, and then that gets cleared through the lymphatic system. Now, the problem with that is that there's a determined lifespan or time frame that these apoptotic neutrophils, for example, will hang around. And if it hangs around too long and they're not cleared by the macrophages, they themselves start to break down and release their internal granulocytes, which contain different enzymes and chemicals that cause tissue inflammation. And that's how we get locked into a state of chronic inflammation. Now, when we look at Candida, Candida releases its own enzymes, for example. So Candida can produce something called hyaluronidase, which breaks down the hyaluronic acid that makes two different chemical components, the N-acetylglucosamine and the glucuronic acid. And through that chemical reaction, we get arabinose production, which is getting picked up on the organic acids test. The other thing that's happening in this particular case is that when we have an invasive cell like Candida, it ends up causing myeloperoxidase production. Now, myeloperoxidase is a chemical that's actually released by neutrophils in an attempt to attack or break down Candida. And it converts into a chemical compound called hypochlorous acid, which becomes an ion or hypochlorite ion, which itself can kill Candida, but it has a very potent oxidizing effect as well. So it can be damaging to the tissues. And so remember, Candida is invasive within the mucosal system. So this reaction is happening along the mucosal lining of the gut of the epithelial cells. An antigen is something that triggers an immune response. And so an antigen like invading Candida or bacteria or some other type of toxin gets picked up by a dendritic cell. Certain macrophages are also what are called antigen-presenting cells. And so this cell presents the antigen to the what's called a naive or a naive CD4 cell or a T helper cell, which is part of the adaptive immune system. And depending upon the molecular pattern of that antigen will determine sort of which direction things go off into. So obviously through the production of different immune chemicals called cytokines. So we can produce what are called CD4 Th2, which is linked to our B cells, linked to plasma cells to make antibodies. Or we can become Th1, which forms memory T cells. Th1 are things that are really attacking intracellular pathogens, so viruses, for example. Or we can also produce just cytotoxic T cells, which will just go after a cell and kill it that's been infected, for example, by an intracellular pathogen. So, and then the determination of these will determine, obviously, with things with regards to autoimmunity, allergy potential, inflammation potential, etc. Now, when we look at Candida again within the digestive tract, a lot of Candida gets antagonized by a healthy microbiome. But if we get Candida that touches down to an epithelial cell, it can induce invasal activity. So a protein called invasin gets released, and it causes the Candida to become invasive, either through a process called endocytosis, where it gets taken into an epithelial cell, or it grows its hypha through the epithelial cell. And sitting below that subepithelial space is a macrophage, for example. And that engulfs the Candida, or at least engages it, and releases different cytokines. Now, some of these are pro-inflammatory, and in one in particular is called a Th17 cell. And this Th17 cell is very important for creating immune activity along the surface lining of these hollow spaces in the body. So the sinuses, the lungs, the digestive tract, the bladder. And interleukin 17 helps engage neutrophils, again, to attack an invading Candida. Th17 cells produce interleukin 22, which induces the production of defensins. These are these host toxic peptides that get released in an attack on Candida within the gut surface. And things tend to get more complicated from there. There's something called an inflammasome. And inflammasomes are critical for the innate immune system in triggering a series of reactions that trigger pro-inflammatory cytokines. And these are there to help attack a microbe like Candida. But if the system is too robust and we don't have enough defense against the inflammasomes, it can cause tissue inflammation. So again, these are normal responses that are being produced to aid against an invading pathogen. But again, anytime we sort of overdo it, or our immune system overdoes it, or we have some type of chronic problem, we can get chronic inflammation and tissue damage. All right, so the Th17 is critical with regards to autoimmunity. So we can see that Th17 produces a number of cytokines, or at least induces a number of cytokines. So interleukin 17, for example, is calling in different cytokines, these inflammatory mediators. And this is also helping to attack pathogens along that mucosal surface. So, for example, neutrophils and macrophages. Interleukin 22, I mentioned, produces those defensin peptides, for example. And then we even have things like interleukin 21, which are involved in what's called IgG class switching. So a B cell differentiation where we're producing different types of IgG. So IgG1, IgG3, for example. But where this gets very interesting and important to understand just from a pure fungal infection, particularly Candida and autoimmunity, is these transcription factors. Now, transcription factors are proteins that control the rate of transcription of genetic information. So, for example, from DNA to messenger RNA, and obviously for the production of different proteins. Part of this cellular response from Th1, Th2 is the Th17. So it's sort of its own category. And then we also have what are called T regulatory cells. Now, as I mentioned, Th17 cells play an important role in maintaining mucosal barrier and contributing to pathogen clearance along the mucosal surfaces. T regulatory cells modulate the immune system, so they basically help to maintain tolerance to what are called self-antigens or potential antigens that are sort of linked to our body, and they prevent against autoimmune disease. There is a relationship between Th17 and T regulatory cells. And so these T regulatory and Th17 T cells share a common signaling origin. Okay, that's related to these transcription factors. And essentially they have an inverse reciprocal effect. So basically, if your Treg is up, it will cause our T17 levels to be down. If our T17 cells are upregulated, we get a downregulation of Treg. So essentially, a way to think of it is if we have too much Th17 activity, we're going to get decreased T regulatory activity. And because T regulatory cells are necessary to prevent against autoimmunity, too much Th17 is going to drive the potential for autoimmune reactions. And this comes from an article called CD4 T Cells, Fates, Functions, and Faults. And the system is complex, but if you just sort of get a general overview, okay, here we have a naive CD4 cell. Okay, and depending on the antigen that's been presented to it from an antigen presenting cell, can drive things off either into Th2 or Th1. As I mentioned, Th2 is very much involved in dealing with extracellular pathogens, allergy, asthma. Th1 is driven more towards intracellular pathogens. It was once thought that Th1 was very much involved in autoimmunity. Not so much anymore, is that really is now linked to the Th17 cells. So when this information first came out, they actually hadn't identified Th17 at that point. So again, Th17 very much towards extracellular bacteria as well as fungus. If we have increased Th17, that causes a suppressive effect on Tregs. Okay, a decrease in Treg activity is going to decrease immune tolerance, which means it's going to increase autoimmune reactivity potential. Now, one of the interesting things about this, when we think of it from a Candida standpoint, is what's happening in the digestive system. So we know that the microbiome plays a huge role in our immune function. So it's necessary for vitamin utilization. It directly antagonizes opportunistic bacteria. But it plays a role in regulating activity of the dendritic cells in how they present information to the immune system. So it will play a role in having an effect on Th17 or Th1 cells or Treg cells. So the bottom line is just to think that the healthier our microbiome is, the healthier our immune response, or more regulated our immune response will be. This is not to sit here and say that Th17 cells are bad or that all Treg cells are good. Okay, there's a balance and an equilibrium that happens biologically in the system. So they all play their role. So when we think about strategies for reducing inflammation and autoimmune induction from fungal infections, it's the improvement of the microbiome that plays a huge role through either a high plant-based diet, fiber, multi-strain probiotics, improve mucosal immune function. So again, diversity of the microbiome. Secretory IgA stimulators, for example. Many probiotics will do that. Saccharomyces boulardii can help to stimulate secretory IgA. So that can play a role as a supplement for a period of time. And then if we've got opportunistic pathogens, so bacterial infections, parasitic infections, if we identify, it's best to try to clear those. If we have other environmental factors, so mold colonization of the gut and mycotoxins, which inhibit aspects of the immune system, elimination of other chemicals, glyphosate, for example. And then various nutrients can be used that assist in gut immunity overall. So colostrum, for example, transfer factor are interesting products which have immune modulating properties. And then, yeah, eliminating or at least reducing as best as possible the fungal overgrowth through various antifungals, whether it's botanicals, prescription medications. So the point is, when it comes to fungal infections like Candida, it's not just what is the best botanical or medication to use to kill the yeast. That is important and it's part of the process, but it's understanding that these fungal issues don't just become a problem on their own. It's all of these other factors that can weaken the body, weaken the microbiome, cause dysregulation of the immune system and the digestive tract that have to be addressed. And that is the fundamental aspects of integrative and functional medicine, is how does the system normally work, understanding it, and then utilizing our tools, the things I just mentioned, to try to regain balance in the system. Now, through our Candida Mastery course, we go into this information in great detail. This is a very in-depth course into aspects of Candida as a fungus, things that are happening in the gut, things that are happening with regards to the immune system, etc. So for more information about the Candida Mastery course, you can go to candidiamasterycourse.com, or you can also email any questions you have to integrativemedicineacademy@gmail.com regarding the Candida Mastery course or many of our other mastery courses through our academy. If you are a healthcare practitioner, you are welcome to join us through a membership website at Functional Medicine Clinical Rounds. This is an opportunity for you to schedule one-on-one consults with myself, Dr. Trincatella, to talk about different cases, lab reviews, troubleshooting, etc. We also have a lot of educational material within the Functional Medicine Clinical Rounds site. In fact, one of the things we have is these clinical round data sheets. These are one-page PDF documents that will talk about a lab test marker or clinical pearls, different things seen clinically. There's a whole library of these along with educational videos as well. If you have any questions about our mastery courses through Integrative Medicine Academy, please reach out to us. The website is integrativemedicineacademy.com or email to integrativemedicineacademy@gmail.com. Again, I'm Dr. Kurt Woeller for Integrative Medicine Academy. Thank you.